Welcome in to the Rockies Insider on Blake Street Banter. I'm your Rockies Insider and your solo banterer for this edition live on YouTube. Noah is on spring break, and that young boy deserves a little bit of time away from his school, from his studies, getting ready for the 2025 campaign, as many of you are out there. And we're going to take a look at how hopeful Rockies fans are. There's a number that's actually been attached to the amount of hope Rockies fans have right now. Dip our toes into the Tokyo series as well. Let's get things started with the news that broke over the weekend. You may or may not already know. Kyle Freeland named the opening day starter for the Colorado Rockies, his fourth opening day start in franchise history. Going ahead of Germán Marquez. They were tied with 3. But now we also know the identity of the opening day starter for the Tampa Bay Rays. On March 28th, it's going to be Shane McClanahan, the former All-Star, in his first full season back from Tommy John surgery. It's Shane McClanahan, a.k.a. close personal friend of Chase Dollander and a known Blake Street Banter watcher. He was in that chat when Aaron and I had the conversation with Chase. So Chase, that was one of the questions I actually asked him, was knowing that opening day was going to be in Tampa against his close friend, his offseason workout partner, against his team. Did that give him a little extra oomph? And sure, it did. Bottom line, he's a professional. He's got all the oomph he needs to try to make this team out of spring training. And he's going to have a good chance doing that here on Tuesday night, 7:40 first pitch start against the Giants, and righty Keaton win for the Giants. This is going to be Dollander's second start against the Giants. You might recall his first of the spring was against the Giants and looked really solid, looked really nasty on top of that as well. The next 24 hours are going to tell us a lot about what the Rockies might do in terms of their opening day roster. I talked about this already over on the Rockies Insider about possibly starting the year with a 4-man rotation, which I think in many ways they are going to, at least technically. They could carry a number 5 starter, or they could just carry an extra reliever. Because if you have a 4-man rotation and the maximum amount of pitchers you're allowed to have on that 26-man roster is 13, well, you could have 9 relievers at that point. Normally, you only have 8 because you've got 5 starting pitchers. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 24 hours between Dollander's start on Tuesday night and what Bradley Blaylock, him now getting his first start in some time. Blaylock has come in out of relief his last 2 outings, as he seems to be a lock for at least a role as the long reliever, but maybe, just maybe, there could be something more for him. So we'll have a much better idea, again, very soon here. Jake Bird was also a name that Bud Black mentioned as being somewhat of a long reliever candidate. Now, typically when you think of a long reliever, you think of a starting pitcher that is just trying to get his foot in the door and play a little at the major league level, get some experience. You don't typically think about a reliever that can go a little bit more than an inning. But we've seen Jake Bird go 2 innings relatively easily. I think he even had a 3-inning outing at least at one point in his career. Might have even been last season. So he's a guy that I think his stuff plays out really well as a long reliever. So that's a bit of a strength that the Rockies have right now, is they only have so many spots in their bullpen, but they have that many more young relievers with upside that very well could end up on that opening day roster. A lot of really good flexibility. The other piece of news that came out of the weekend, and is one of the reasons why there's been that conversation of a 4-man rotation, it's because Austin Gomber was placed on the injured list, or he will start the season on the injured list. Hasn't happened just yet. So that sure shoulder just not right. He did end up pitching on Sunday. There's some hope that he can pitch again this weekend, March 22nd, on one of the backfield games. So Perhaps it'll only be a 15-day IL stint. Maybe he'll need a little bit more than that. But it's a long season for him. He's a free agent at the end of the year. Gomber very well could be a good trade candidate at the July 31st trade deadline. He's also a player that, again, depending on how well he does this season, the Rockies may want to bring him back. Marquez, also a free agent after this year. So depending on what the Rockies get from some of their young starting pitchers, or rather what they allow themselves to get, because if you're not giving those opportunities to those young starting pitchers, well, then you're not going to know what you have for 2026. So a lot up in the air, but they're going to be cautious for right now with Austin Gomber. I think that makes sense. On Tuesday night, you will have also seen lefty Scott Alexander, Jaden Hill, Diego Castillo, and Zach Agnos pitching in that game against the Giants. Agnos, probably the odd man out. The other three very well could be on that opening day roster. We know Scott Alexander is. He's a lock, has a big league deal, no options, 35 years old. Diego Castillo, a non-roster invite. Very much seems like he is going to be placed on the 40-man and 26-man active roster. And then Jaden Hill. Jaden Hill is very much fighting for a spot. He looked great in that spring breakout game. I know Aaron discussed that on Monday's Blake Street banner show, Road to Blake Street, and did a great job highlighting all of the young players that starred in spring breakout on Sunday against the White Sox. Jaden Hill was one of those players, 3 strikeouts in his 1 inning of work. Agnos, odd man out, but he's been really solid. Overall, I think because he's not on the 40-man roster, that puts him at a major disadvantage. It allows you to have him without burning an option or really even just burning a 40-man roster spot because you've got other capable relievers. If Diego Castillo doesn't work out, that's great. Then Zach Agnos can get his opportunity. But if you give Agnos that opportunity and Diego Castillo is not placed on the 40-man roster, Castillo very well could end up with somebody else, as a lot of these big leaguers, a lot of these veterans have clauses in their spring training contracts saying, hey, if I'm not placed on the 40-man roster, you've got to waive me. You've got to give me an opportunity to go somewhere else. So you put Agnos on that active roster, that 40-man roster. You don't have Castillo, but you can have your cake and eat it too if you send Agnos to AAA. So I think we're still going to end up seeing Agnos in Denver, regardless of what his numbers end up looking like in Albuquerque. They might not end up being pretty, but I think he's going to be okay. And for a young guy of his stature, I think he has the mental tenacity, the mental toughness to be able to withstand, the brutality that is the Pacific Coast League, and that is pitching at Albuquerque, at altitude in New Mexico. Again, depending on when you're listening to this, you may have already watched Game 1 of the Tokyo series. I'm not totally dragging. I'm still on a high after the season began this morning. I was up at 4 a.m., had a really, really good time doing that. Norm, not sure if you're there or not, but appreciate you jumping into the chat. We will certainly discuss that here in a second. You're a Dodgers fan. You feel for Rockies fans. Of course, the fan base right now is struggling a little bit in terms of going with the flow and trusting the front office and trusting owner Dick Monfort, as you point out here, Norm, that really this is part of a vision, part of a bigger picture, rather than really just sitting back and just hoping, crossing your fingers that something is going to work out. But I had a good time on social media, decided it's very easy to speak to people in different parts of the world. Like, it takes one extra step. There's an app on your phone to translate language, and in Japanese kanji just said, hey, who's watching the Tokyo series in Japan right now? Are you a Rockies fan? And if so, what do you like about the Rockies? Why are you a Rockies fan? What are your expectations for this season? And it was really cool. Got a lot of fun responses. A couple, fans from Japan that reached out and communicated. They actually were Rockies fans. A lot of them mentioned Kaz Matsui, and I let them know in response, hey, Kaz Matsui is adored still here in Denver for everything that he provided that 2007 club. He was only around for a year and a half. In fact, he's the last Japanese-born player to appear in a game for the Rockies. And yet Matsui, his presence in many ways is still felt. He's still talked about and discussed. So that was really neat talking with some of those Japanese fans, some of which had actually been out to Colorado and have seen the beautiful mountains. That's one of the big things that they know. Some of them like Dinger. It was fun. It was a really cool series of interactions. And it was really cool to see Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Shota Imanaga facing off this morning, Tuesday morning, the first time a pair of Japanese starting pitchers faced off against each other on opening day. First time for that happening, which was really, really neat. There had been 3 other Japanese pitchers who had appeared in a game in the majors at the Tokyo Dome, where the Tokyo series is being held. Daisuke Matsuzaka in 2008, Hideki Okajima in a relief role, Yusei Kikuchi in 2019. And then in game 2 on Wednesday morning at 4 a.m., Roki Sasaki will make his major league debut right at home there in Japan. So the list of Japanese pitchers pitching in a regular season game in Japan will now double because of the Tokyo series. So I think that's really cool. Dodgers got the win 4-1. Shota Imanaga looked great over his 4 innings of work. No hitter up to that point. Ohtani ended up breaking up that no hitter. Ben Brown really struggled, walked 5. Imanaga walked 2, but he was able to escape those jams. But Ben Brown, that really was the difference. Dodgers opened up the gates there with 3 runs. I think that might have all been in the 5th inning, but not a lot of power. That ballpark looked gigantic. I think maybe some of it had to do with the camera angle just a little bit, but it looked like there's no way a ball's going to get out. And I think there was only the double from Ohtani that was down the line that ended up being an extra base hit. So good game overall, just different lighting, right? Because it's a dome, so you're not getting the natural lighting. They are playing on AstroTurf, so it does look a little bit funny, but it was nice watching baseball. Real regular season, this time it counts kind of baseball. Mookie Betts not in the game due to an illness. I'd seen him taking ground balls and just kind of walking around. Man, he looked like totally fatigued. He was absolutely dragging. Dodgers have actually sent him home for him to rest up. His listed weight is 180 pounds. He's already down to 161 because of some of the weight he's lost from this virus that he had and still has. Freddie Freeman was a late scratch rib injury that's been bothering him throughout actually most of the offseason as well. It was interesting because I remember reading a quote that, during batting practice, he said, I was really trying to put some souvenirs out there in the stands for the fans because they were rabid, even just during our BP, even just during the practice days. And so, was that part of the cause? Who knows? But Kike Hernandez moves over to first base. Michael Conforto ends up getting the start. Other Dodgers on the IL that I don't even think made the trip: Tony Gonsolin, Michael Kopech, and Evan Phillips. For the Cubs, it was Nico Horner who didn't make the trip to Japan. He's still recovering from right flexor tendon surgery. That's basically your forearm. He had that back in October. He might be able to go on March 27th in the domestic opening day that we have here in the U.S. Javier Assad is throwing, but his injury has really kept him out of much of spring training. So he'll start the season on the IL for the Cubs. Otherwise, everyone was there. I noticed that Miguel Rojas is now wearing the number 772. I thought that was odd and realized, oh, that's right. He was number 11 last year. He gave that to Roki Sasaki. But why 72? Well, that was actually the number he wore when he debuted with the Dodgers back in 2014. So odd number, but I dig it. It means something. I think that was really neat. We're going to have over these 2 days in Tokyo 5 Japanese-born players in the series. We saw 4 of them on Tuesday morning. Ohtani faced off against Shota Imanaga. Yamamoto faced off against Seiya Suzuki. And then Roki Sasaki will make the start. And, of course, will face Seiya Suzuki, who really looked beaten down after that 4-1 loss. It looked like he really took that to heart in a major way, really wanted to win that game for not only his countrymen and Shota Imanaga, but his country, right? He wanted to win for Japan. Only one side with 2 Japanese-born players was going to win. And actually, the Dodgers have 4 because there are 6 Japanese-born big leaguers participating in the series. The other, of course, is Dave Roberts, which you might not have known. He was actually born in Okinawa, Japan. Probably saw Seiya Suzuki not necessarily taking batting practice, but using a sword, swiping at some baseballs with a sword. I thought that was really cool. And I hope the Cubs are holding on to those baseballs and giving them away. That's an awesome souvenir. I don't know anybody that has a baseball that was sliced in half by a big leaguer via a samurai sword. So pretty cool little piece right there. Evan Drellick of The Athletic said that these 2 games are going to bring in $35 million for Major League Baseball. That's insane. The Tokyo series is going to be, quote, the biggest standalone international event in the history of Major League Baseball, according to Commissioner Rob Manfred. So it was outstanding. Yeah, the passion of the Japanese fans, absolutely great. You might have seen on social media at Patrick D. Lyons that when I went on Monday night, so less than 12 hours before first pitch in Tokyo, that the cheapest tickets would be, if you wanted 2, I think you could have gotten in for $1,500. But if you're looking for 2 seats next to each other, it was $2,100 US to see that game. So unbelievable. You did get to see 2 base hits from Ohtani. So no homers, but you did get a double there. 2 runs scored as well. And look, the history of baseball or history of Major League Baseball in Japan isn't really that old. This is actually going to be the 25th anniversary this year of the first time when MLB played a game in Japan, Mets Cubs. So, and really that series in 2000 only came 4 years after the first proper international series. Also included the Mets. Mets played the Padres in Mexico, in Monterrey, Mexico, for a short little series back in 1996. Manfred, one of the things he did say over the past week is that, there's probably going to be a lot more regular activity in Japan and Korea, and that this might be one of the things that gets negotiated. And I think the Players Association will be fine, but one of the things that will get negotiated coming up in the CBA when it ends after the 2026 season. So expect a lot more of that. And if the Rockies ever want to participate in one of these series in Japan, that would, of course, be awesome. They really might need a Japanese-born player on their roster, because when you go through the history of all the different times that MLB has played a game in Japan, there's been a Japanese presence. Other than the first time in 2000, there's always been a Japanese player, pitcher, position player, or otherwise, represented in the series. And the Rockies haven't had that since 2007 with Kaz Matsui. So that's something that would have to change. Again, that's not how you run a team. That's not how you build your roster in hopes of participating in a game like that. But even still, it's kind of interesting going back and looking through the history of these games. In the first one in 2000, Eric Young Sr. actually led off for the Cubs. Jeff Hewson, that's right. On the Rockies TV broadcast, you know him, you love him, Jeff Hewson. He was a late inning substitution for the Cubs. 2 of those guys with Rockies ties playing there with the Northsiders. And Mike Hampton, he started that game for the Mets. 1 year later, he would be starting for the Colorado Rockies. And the big dramatic flair during that first series in Japan in 2000 was that the Mets ended up winning with a walk-off. I believe it was. Yeah, it was a pinch hit grand slam by Benny Agbayani, who was with the Rockies for a brief amount of time in 2002. But Benny Agbayani, born and raised in Hawaii, so you've got a little bit of a connection there. That was really cool. MLB went back in 2004. It was Yankees Devil Rays. Yes, the Devil Rays And I don't say that because they're not called the Devil Rays anymore, but because when you think about a premier event like this, the Devil Rays? Yeah, it was the Devil Rays. But this was all about Hideki Matsui, who had just come to MLB the year prior in 2003. And he was playing in his home stadium as he was one of the stars for the Yomiuri Giants, a.k.a. the Tokyo Giants. In 2008, it was all about Daisuke Matsuzaka. Hideki Okajima was there too as well. But it was Red Sox, A's, and it also came right after, just like with the Dodgers, having won the World Series in 2024. They start 2025 in Japan, actually start their season with an automatic ball because the pitch timer timed out and Yamamoto and Will Smith said to the ump, no, it's a pitch comm issue. Umpire said, I don't want to hear it. That's ball one. That's how the first pitch, or that's the first thing that's going to happen after you guys won the World Series last year. And then Will Smith said, okay, well, we still have a pitch comm issue. So, all right, time. Let's fix this communicator. So Dodgers win the World Series, start the next season in Japan. The Red Sox, sorry to bring that up, Rockies fans, Red Sox doing the same thing, winning the World Series in 2007, and then starting 2008 in Japan against the A's. In that first game, in the 10th inning, Houston Street ended up blowing the save there. So another guy with Rockies ties. 2012, it was Mariners and A's. Ichiro returns to Japan for the first time since coming over to MLB in 2001. It was actually his final season with the Mariners before going back there in 2018. He ended up collecting 4 hits. Not bad for a guy who's 38 years old and would still go on to play 6 more seasons, parts of 6 more seasons in the majors, and needed 572 more base hits to reach 3,000. So he was grinding down. He was certainly winding down in productivity, but he did get the job done ultimately in Colorado. And then in 2019, the last time MLB went to Japan for a regular season game, it was Mariners, A's. Ichiro again retires. If you had watched that game at all, or you remember, Ichiro trotted out to right field at age 45, becoming the second oldest position player to start a season opener. He went 0 for 1 with a walk, and he was pulled in the 4th inning. But in game 2, he gets the start, and in the bottom of the 8th, even before that, to set the scene, word starts to spread. Oh, wow, this is going to be it. Ichiro is going to retire. He came back to play 2 games, but he came back to finish his career where it started, in Japan. And he exits the game. Everyone's in tears. I can remember seeing Yusei Kikuchi crying. A beautiful moment, beautiful baseball moment for Ichiro. Might be a little less tears this summer when he gets inducted to Cooperstown, but still pretty neat. Now, what's on deck for MLB internationally? I think that's pretty much it as far as the regular season is concerned in 2025. The Red Sox are actually going to go down to Monterey to play 2 exhibition games to end their spring training on March 24th and 25th. So in a week from now, they'll get an off day on the 26th before starting on the 27th in Arlington against the Rangers. So they're in the general area. But MLB had planned a few international games this season that ultimately ended up getting scrapped last year. One of the big things that was a part of the last CBA that began in 2022 is playing more games in Europe, specifically Paris. They had earmarked 2025 as the time in which a regular season game would be played at the Stade de France, the Stadium of France, right? The France Stadium in Paris, or just outside of Paris. And unfortunately, they weren't really able to work that out. They did have some scheduling issues. They couldn't figure out how to build the field there. They couldn't get a promoter for the event. So that got pushed back at least a year. Plans on holding a game this year in Mexico City and San Juan, Puerto Rico were also canceled last November. So next year, MLB is looking to go back to Mexico City in May, London in June, San Juan in September. And of course, at the start of 2026 in March, we're going to have the return of the World Baseball Classic. Pool C will play in the Tokyo Dome. That's going to have Japan, South Korea, Australia, Czech Republic, and a fifth team, probably Chinese Taipei. They just qualified. And then Pool A is going to play in San Juan, Puerto Rico at Hiram Bythorne Stadium. Puerto Rico, Cuba, Canada, Panama, and a fifth country will play there. I'm not sure if it's going to be Nicaragua, Colombia, or the team that some Rockies fans might be pulling for, Brazil, as it not only has the son of Manny Ramirez, but also the son of Dante Bichette Jr. on Team Brazil. That's a pretty cool one right there. Rockies Insider with me, Patrick Lyons, getting to some of your questions in the chat. You anticipated it. Either that or you're just really good at reading headlines. How much hope do Rockies have going into 2025? Norm saying in the chat, what are your expectations for Colorado and what are you looking for as far as signs of progress? Well, the win-loss record is not a major one for me. You do want to win more games than last year, but it's who you win those games with. I think that is most important. That's one of the things that I've said a lot on the Rockies Insider this offseason. You could only, quote unquote, lose 99 games with a bunch of veterans, or you could lose 110 games with all of your young players and have a much better idea as to what you have going forward. Finding another Doyle, finding another Tovar, having Doyle and Tovar step up another notch where they become all-stars. They're already Gold Glove Award winners, but can they become all-stars? Those are more than just the two guys that I think Rockies fans are really hoping can break out in 2025. And you get a much better idea about what you've got in Nolan Jones. And can Zach Veen and Jordan Beck take a big step forward in their first full seasons in the majors? Should both of them even get those opportunities? Wild the Innocent, always good to see you in the chat. I'm on my fourth cup of coffee after waking up early to turn on Game One this morning. Well, you probably had too many cups of coffee because if you just had your fourth right now, caffeine stays in your system for like 6 to 8 hours. So you're still going to be up to midnight now. You got to flush that out of your system. Drink a lot of water, get some electrolytes, some liquid IV, flush it out so that you can go to bed a little bit early. For me, look, I like my circadian rhythms. 90-minute intervals are key. So I'm not going for 9 hours tonight. I'm going for 10 and a half. I got to make up for a little bit of sleep. I put up a lot of new videos over on the Rockies Insider channel on YouTube, stuff from Brenton Doyle, Zach Veen talking about how excited he is right now and some of his expectations about possibly making the team, the opening day roster, that is. So a lot of really, really new video you got to check out over there. But The Athletic did something that they've done the last couple seasons. I believe this is their fourth year. And they get subscribers all around the country. I imagine they have less and less Rockies subscribers, Rockies fans, because they ended up killing their coverage. Nick Roque did an outstanding job, first for the Denver Post, then for The Athletic. Outstanding job. Someone that I looked up to, someone that I learned a thing or two from in being around him. And unfortunately, The Athletic said, well, you know what? I know we said we want to be in a lot of these communities or in all of these communities to give you that hometown touch. But we decided we're going to break our promise to you, to break our promise to all of those communities and those cities around the U.S. that have baseball coverage. And look, if you're listening to this show and you know me, you know that other companies have broken that promise to their diehard fans. So going back 4 years, they've done this where Rockies fans, fans of all 30 teams, will vote. What's their hope? They get asked a couple questions, but what's your hope for 2025? And Dodgers fans, to no surprise, they rank top of the list. They are the most optimistic. 99.7% of fans optimistic. That's pretty wild. That's pretty wild. 99.7. Maybe even more surprising, the Diamondbacks are right behind. Fans of the Diamondbacks are at 99.4%. Incredible. Rangers, Mets, Royals, and Red Sox fans 3 through 6 are at 90% and up. Middle of the pack. Who's right in the middle? 14 through 17. Tampa Bay at 73.8%. Their fans optimistic despite having to play in a minor league ballpark. Okay. No shade. No shade being thrown there, but they like their young guys. They do. And look, I think this is probably one of those years where they do bounce back, where they didn't have it together in 2024. So they are waiting in the weeds. At number 15, you had Cleveland, 16 with San Diego. And number 17, Yankees fans are at 68.1%. Not sure how many people voted before Garrett Cole was lost for the entire season. I'm thinking a lot of people got their votes in a little bit earlier. Yankees fans might end up really being in the low 20s right now at this point. But here's the final five, aka the hopeless. At 26th, fans of the Marlins, 15.6% are hopeful. It makes sense to be so low because they've signed only one big league free agent this entire offseason, Cal Quantrill. Number 27, fans of the St. Louis Cardinals, 11.9% are optimistic. They're the only team in Major League Baseball to not sign a single free agent to a big league deal. 28th, the Angels at 11.5%. Say what you will about their owner, but I imagine a lot of the fan optimism has something to do with being disgruntled about their owner and how the way he does business. At 29, your Colorado Rockies at 8.8%, only 1/10 of a percentage point ahead of number 30, the Chicago White Sox at 8.7%. Where does that rank in terms of the last couple years? Almost identical. Now, here are some of the Rockies fan comments that I do want to read. Here are some of the comments. And yes, Nolan left Colorado for not signing anyone. Yeah, right away, 2022 is when they had the first hopeometer. And the results were not much better than they are right now. But here are some of the Rockies fan comments. Quote, I'm more optimistic. I'll drink a martini stirred with ice from Pluto than I am that the Rockies will qualify for the postseason in my lifetime. That's pretty snide. Second quote, I'm optimistic that taking in a game at Coors Field will remain undefeated. Otherwise, maybe one day someone really rich will make an offer that current ownership can't turn down, and then we can join the list of teams actually trying to win, end quote. And then finally, we're safe from relegation, and we're a month from Coors beers on the rooftop, end quote. Last year, 2024, Rockies, in terms of hope, dead last, 4.6% in terms of optimism. So about half of what it is now. So the hope has doubled. And thanks to the White Sox, Rockies are not last. They're 29th. In 2023, this is what I found interesting. I don't remember. I mean, I do remember plenty of details, but nothing jumps out as to why only 1.8% of Rockies fans would have said they were optimistic ahead of the 2023 season. Also 30th amongst the 30 MLB fan bases. Because this was actually before the Rockies had lost 100 games. But you'd only just gotten Ezequiel Tovar. You played all of 2022 without Trevor Story, without John Gray. Chris Bryant was a disappointment, being on the IL, spending much of that season banged up. But 1.8% in 2023, doubles in 2024 to 4.6%, nearly doubles again, 8.8%, 29th team in all of MLB in terms of hope. In the chat, Miami operates almost like a farm club for other teams. It's just a matter of time before they trade their young players, usually when they hit arbitration, when they get a little bit pricey, or near free agency. I'm glad you said that because that was one of the comments from other fan bases that are a bit disgruntled that I thought were worth repeating. One Marlins fan said, quote, about the 1,000th year of the rebuild. True. Or rather the 1,000th rebuild for them. Fans of the Blue Jays said, how many times can you, quote, run it back before you've run so far back you find yourself in last? Lack of effort is securing a talented young core, bad contracts, and outrageous internal player evaluations. The $300+ million renovation will look awful when they can't fill seats. And it's interesting how some of these frustrated fan base have these quips or these comments about their favorite team because a lot of these teams blend together, and you could almost say, if I didn't tell you what fan base this quote came from, you might think it's this team, that team, perhaps another team. But the Blue Jays right now are in an interesting spot because I haven't sat down and made my final American League predictions just yet. Still got a little over a week. But the Blue Jays very much have a chance to go to the postseason this year. I think a lot of fans are obviously, and rightfully so, disgruntled that they weren't able to get a deal done with Vlad Guerrero Jr., despite the fact that he went to the Jays and said, I'll do like a 15-year, $500 million deal. Jay said no. I believe that was the reported quote that Vladdy had to the Blue Jays. But they're disgruntled. That being said, they still have a really strong starting rotation. Chris Bassett's still there. Kevin Gossman is still there. Yariel Rodriguez, maybe you finally get to see what the Jays front office saw when they signed him out of Cuba. There are still guys with ability. Jose Berrios is a player that I can remember, I think it was 6 years ago, I had pegged to win the AL Cy Young Award. And he's been kind of up and down, but you still see a lot of life in his outings. So they still have those pieces. They still have Springer, who's not the same Springer. They still have Vlad Guerrero Jr. They still have Bo Bichette. All of that does change after this season. All of that could change at this year's trade deadline. If the Blue Jays are out of it and they need to salvage something, they might end up having a massive fire sale. But with a fire sale that is massive comes a turnaround and a rebuild that gets done a lot quicker than when you drag your feet and you don't have a direction. Another comment from, or maybe I should let you think about what fan base said this. Fan of what fan base said, quote, in terms of their hopeometer, quote, I wish they would pick a lane. Are we going to spend the money to compete or reset with rookies and a couple of bad years before becoming dominant again? The team has seemed to be half in for 5 straight years. What fan base did that quote come from? Let's go ahead and lock in your answers. Los Angeles Angels. Yeah, that's about right. Because the Angels they're rebuilding. If you're on the outside looking in, they're rebuilding. But they don't think that they're rebuilding. That's why they're going out and signing the likes of Yusei Kikuchi and bringing in Kyle Hendricks and promoting their guys as soon as they get drafted. I talked with one Angels fan during spring training and kind of quipped that, who's going to be on the roster in August, if they have their own fire sale and trade off some of their more veteran pieces to bring in prospects for the future, live to fight another day, right? That, they're possibly their starting shortstop right now is a junior at some Division I college that plays SEC ball. Like that's their shortstop come August 5th because they promote so quickly. And it'll be interesting to see how the development of these players that they've been so aggressive in promoting, how it gets stunted. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe you'll go back and look and say, it's always a crapshoot with prospects, but out of these 5 that it's been probably a lot more than 5, but out of these 10 that they promoted very quickly, you got a typical survey of, this one guy really broke out, 3 or 4 guys, slightly above average players, one fringy, another guy didn't have a very long career. That's what can happen with draft picks. So, you know what? Give them that opportunity earlier than later. Don't waste that potential, right? Angels for sale, then not for sale in the comment. Yeah, I think I had heard that they were going to be put up for sale. Artie Moreno getting up there in years. But yes, not for sale to my knowledge. Boston, also another comment, has been wishy-washy as well in recent years. A little bit, yeah. They've been a little all over the place. And right now, they are definitely on an in-year. They are on one of those years in which they think they're going to be contenders. And I think they will. they did have a sneaky good offseason with Walker Buehler, 1-year deal. I think there's an option in there. Also bringing in Alex Bregman and the trade for Garrett Crochet. So Boston is ready to contend. Hey, how are you doing in the chat? Good to see you. Thanks for dropping by on the Rockies Insider on Blake Street banner. Another comment. Who did this come from? Fans of what fan base? Rather, fans of what MLB team said in the Athletic Hopeometer comments, quote, the front office promised a rebuild, then didn't deal almost any of our aging talent, made a tough rebuild year sadder with our fossils. Ooh, are there a couple key words in there that will give you an idea as to what fan base this person is a part of? That would be a St. Louis Cardinals fan. Yes, they were supposed to cut a little bit of payroll by trading Nolan Arenado, or after Arenado rejected his deal to the Houston Astros, it seemed as if they were going to pivot and then deal Eric Fedde, Ryan Helsley, try to get rid of some of their more veteran contracts, Steven Matz. Then that didn't happen. There's still a chance that the Cardinals are waiting for somebody to get hurt. And maybe that person is already hurt. Maybe Garrett Cole going down with Tommy John surgery. Maybe Arenado ends up going to the Yankees before opening day gets kickstarted next Thursday, March 27th. Sure, you're losing an ace and you're bringing in an above average, virtually perennial third baseman, perennial all-star, who's certainly on the wrong side of his career in that way. But you have a loss, and you can definitely make a big improvement by bringing in somebody like Nolan Arenado. So baseball has definitely changed in that way, where the offseason is no longer just those winter months. You can still make late moves. You saw the Rockies do that with Jake Cave at the end of spring training. Bud Black said, look, that could still happen this year, depending on who gets kicked around. I think they've got enough pieces right now in camp to check off all the boxes. It seems like they did last year with Bradley Zimmer. Then they end up bringing in Sam Hilliard and then that trade with the Phillies to acquire Jake Cave. It seems like Nick Martini is going to fill that role, maybe even Sean Bouchard. But again, that kind of remains to be seen what goes on with the Cardinals. And then lastly, rooting for the blank. What fan base is this person a part of? Rooting for the blank is like missing a tooth. Your tongue knows it'll hurt, but it keeps going back to it again and again. It hurts every time, and you tell your tongue to find somewhere, anywhere else in your mouth to go, but it keeps coming back to that pit of pain and misery. What fan base did that come from? Go ahead and lock that answer in. That would be a fan of the Chicago White Sox, who they're 30th in terms of hope. And look, they've got some good young players on that roster. Opening day starter Sean Burke probably doesn't maybe get you as excited as the last couple of years when it was Garrett Crochet and Dylan Cease. But their rebuild, definitely hit a bump in the road. They were still rebuilding last year, but they thought they were on the way up, at least a little bit. And they definitely were not. But they got some good pieces in some of the deals that they were able to make. So we'll see what they end up doing this year. But White Sox fans definitely struggling. And you understand that. You feel their pain. So I think the question that I come to in terms of the Rockies is, can exceeding expectations increase the hopeometer for 2026? And it goes back to sort of where I started. It's how you win more games. And that how is who you win more games with. If Marquez and Gomber are the Rockies' two best pitchers, and then they leave in free agency, that's not going to give you a lot of hope going forward. What happens with Ryan Feltner? Does he take another step forward, or is he the same pitcher? If he's the same pitcher, that's still quality for the Rockies. That's still a really good number 3 starter. Is Kyle Freeland up and down? Is he healthy? You got to hope he's healthy above all else, especially with everything he's been through over the last 2 years and being leaned on as hard as he's been. Antonio Senzatella, what does his 2025 look like? Is Chase Dollander getting an opportunity. And what do those opportunities look like? How much success is he having? So if Marquez and Gomber are your top two pitchers, head and shoulders above everybody else, that's not a good sign for increasing your hope going forward. Unless they come back, I think Marquez is more likely to do that than Gomber. But if they're gone in free agency, the hopeometer is not going to go up. If Nick Martini, Kyle Farmer, and Tyro Estrada, and maybe even Chris Bryant provide better than league average performance this season, the hopeometer is not going up because you want the young players to be taking a step forward. You want those young guys being better than what we know them to be. You want Doyle and Tovar becoming all-stars this year. If they're not, and they provide the same level of performance that they've been the last 2 years, I think that's okay. I think that's all right. You might be getting into the Ryan McMahon territory where, okay, there's hope that there's another ceiling, there's another level, another tier that maybe they don't get to, but still, that's a valuable cog in the wheel to have. You do want to see a lot more from Nolan Jones and Jordan Beck and Zach Veen and Hunter Goodman and Michael Tolia, Ariel Amador getting a lot more time in the majors. So there's a lot of guys that you want to see a lot more of in contributing. And if it's some of the older guys that aren't going to be around going forward, like the Martini, Farmer, Estrada, and maybe even Chris Bryant, that's not going to increase your hope. It's great if Chris Bryant can be back on the field. 20 home runs, say 75 RBI. That's great. That's more than what he has right now in 3 years with the Rockies. That is an improvement, and that is going to help you win more games. But going forward over the final 3 years of that deal, you don't necessarily feel better about the core of the Rockies, because I really wouldn't include Chris Bryant in that core right now. When you talk about, hey, how do they get back to the postseason? If it's relying on KB to be that aircraft carrier they thought they were getting when they signed him to a $182 million deal, that's just not going to happen. And if, again, the young guys can't establish themselves, then no, exceeding expectations and winning 70 games can ultimately be for naught. And I think that would be, again, bittersweet because, again, you avoided 100 losses. That's great. But you don't feel better about the future of the franchise. The future of the franchise is what it's all about. And you want to see the future right now, in the present day. And that can only happen if they're given those opportunities. So the hope right now is low, but there's nothing but potential for it to get bigger. Nothing but potential for it to grow with all of these young guys on the roster. And because there's so many of them, and yes, there's still maybe more veterans than you would like that are going to be on that opening day roster, you have to find a way to finish that bridge to the young players. Finish that bridge to this being a core that can get the club back to the postseason. If this is going to be a 2016 kind of season, and next year is when, 2026 is when you're battling for a playoff spot, well, you have to let the kids play, which is what Walt Weiss and Jeff Bridich, when he was the GM of the team in 2016, were able to do with so many of the young guys on the roster. Let them play and get out of their way. That has to happen to really exceed expectations. It's not so much about wins and losses. It really isn't. It's about who. It's about who is contributing and who is reaching out to me on social media. That's also what it's about. At Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB, at Rockies_insider. Make sure you're also following Blake Street Banner on all the social medias. I know on X it's at Blake ST Banter. Check out the YouTube channel. Leave a comment. Those things can go a long way towards pushing more videos out into the algorithm. It's one of the reasons why I've teamed up with Blake Street Banners, because these guys do a wonderful job. They're passionate. They want to do a better job. They want to do more, and you can help them. You need to do more and do your part, and leave a review wherever you might listen to this, or wherever you might consume and watch this. So do appreciate that. Make sure you're going over to BlakeStreetBanner.com as well to check out their written content. They did a wonderful job going into the top 40. In fact, they did even more than the top 40 prospects. Right now is the time. And word on the street is there's going to be a huge series dropping next week. That's not so much about prospects, but a lot more having to do with the history of the Colorado Rockies, the very relevant history of the Rockies here in 2025. So thanks to everybody, Vanessa, Wild, Norm. Appreciate all of you jumping into the chat and giving me this momentum for the rest of the week. But hey, as I like to say about momentum, it can only be as good as your next show. So of course, I'll talk to you then.